Awesome. Well, I don't think I've interviewed anyone with as much podcasting experience as you have, whether it's creating or being on shows. So I'd really like to do sort of a choose your own adventure, which I know is also a part of the work that you do. You really like coaching people with that term, choose your own adventure. If we were to use that and apply it to today's episode, choosing your own adventure when it comes to giving some advice to youth, what would be something that you feel you would really like to teach these days?
I would say my favorite lesson to teach anyone of any age would be this: all beliefs have consequences.
In terms of the beliefs leading to our feelings and our thoughts and our actions, our results, so to speak, or the way that a previous guest, Terrence, said it, that our dominoes all line up, that really gets my wheels turning in terms of the fact that it could be bad, but it could be good as well. Beliefs, interestingly enough, can be a confusing term for people. When you use that, how would you define or give an example of what a belief is?
I'd love to share with you what I used to believe a belief was, and then the freedom that came from a different perspective on what it means. So, what I used to think is that a belief is something that is true. It is something that has been taught to you by sages and wise people in your youth that you are taught to look up to as authority figures that you should respect. And if those people said this thing, taught this lesson, and it was endorsed by this wide group of people, somewhat even in my perception worldwide, everybody believes this, then this is truth. This is the way life is. This is an undisputable fact, and that's what beliefs are. Beliefs are undisputed truths that we live by. I used to think that, and I had a horrible experience of life as a result of it. Today, I will tell you that the way that I see a belief and define it today is a belief is nothing more than a thought that you have some feeling or emotion, but you have a thought. It is a thought that you have a feeling of certainty is true. So you have an emotional connection that you believe that it is this thought is somehow true. This is just something that you have a feeling about. Another way of defining a belief is a belief is nothing more than a thought that you have the habit of thinking. And so therefore, one of the things that did for me is it completely uprooted this idea that a belief was an undisputable fact that everyone must agree upon. And anybody who disagrees with a belief somehow is just not looking at life and reality for what it is. Whereas now it's like, I am open to questioning everything and see if there's not only evidence to support what I believe to be true, but I'm willing now to say, is there evidence to support that maybe there are cases where that's not true? And then in every single situation, circumstance, I am willing to ask this question: does this belief support me in creating the life I feel most called to create in this world? Or does this belief cause me to live in a way that is out of alignment with what I want to be, or who I want to be, how I want to be, and what I want to create in this world? And if a belief is not serving me and the way I feel called to live, I am now more than willing to drop that belief and adopt something different.
A lot of times people will ask me questions about goal setting, and I'll often find myself trying to explain that it's hard for me to speak in terms of facts, but if you want to go down discussing your beliefs and doing some debate in the difficult work, then that is something that we can certainly work with. When it comes to being able to change your beliefs, I know that you shared very briefly that it led to a terrible life, in your case, the beliefs that you had. If you wouldn't mind sharing what that was and how you feel like you were able to start shifting them, I think that could be really powerful for people as well.
Sure. So I will give you one particular example that I talk about a lot. I speak to a lot of people who want to be full-time self-employed entrepreneurial type of individuals. And so I had lived until January 2008, I had lived my entire lifetime as an employee. And then I discovered the world of podcasting, content creation, and I began to ask myself, I wonder what life would be like if I could do this for a living instead of selling insurance in a family run insurance agency owned by my parents that was started by my grandfather in 1937, where I'm next in line to take it over. So once I got over all of the uh, feelings of guilt and shame about what it means to go out and try to make a living doing my hobby and something I love to do, when there was this guaranteed secure career path for me, especially back in 2008 when job security was not something that was high on the list for a lot of people, but I happened to have it. And here I was risking everything to go out on my own. Well, anyway, I did make that decision. January 1st, 2008, I became full-time self-employed, and I did not have an entirely wonderful experience financially and physically as a result of the belief system that I had. Now, I wasn't aware of this at the time, what caused all of this. It's only later that I can look back and evaluate it. But here's what happened. I was working 12 to 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I never took a single day off for the first 9 months. During that entire period of time, not a single paycheck was paid from my business to myself. No paycheck. Now, throughout the entire year, even from day one, the business was generating revenue right around $2,000 to $4,000 a month. And it was paying for my CPA, it was paying for health insurance for myself and my family, and it's paying all the overhead of the business. But as far as an income, there was no income for the first 9 months. Finally, I was starting to get a little burned out. And I decided to take Sundays off, 1 day a week off. But the only way I could do that is my employer forced me to work more hours the other 6 days of the week. Says, sure, you can take that Sunday off only if you agree to pick up those missed hours the other 6 days. By the way, my employer was me. So I said, okay. And I celebrated, by the way, my first year as a full-time self-employed business owner and a content creator. I recorded a 24-hour nonstop podcast marathon where I recorded 24 one-hour podcast episodes in 24 hours, publishing them as I was going along and recording the next episode. And I celebrated the end of that with a trip to the ER.
Wow.
Because I was in so much pain. And it turns out that once I got there and they did some x-rays, I had massive gallstones inside of my gut, and one was stuck inside of my cystic lining and in my cystic duct. And I almost died in the hospital as a result of this. So, and by the way, after I got out of that and went to my CPA a couple of weeks later and did my taxes for the first year, he says, congratulations, you're profitable in your business, your first year of your business. I made $11,000 net income that year. And why is that? Why did I work around the clock and only make $11,000 personal income? And it has everything to do with my belief system. Why did I destroy my physical body with lots of stress, worry, anxiety about all of this money stuff? It's because there are a couple of beliefs that I had. Number one, I believed that the harder what you do is, the more money you should earn. So nothing I was doing was hard. Everything was easy, and I felt unworthy of the income coming my way from doing something that was so easy. The next one is I had another belief that says the more you hate what you're doing, the more you should get paid to do it. I loved what I was doing. I felt somewhat ashamed that I'm earning any money from my hobby. And I mean, these are the kinds of words that were in my head. It's like, I can't believe I'm getting paid to talk into a microphone. I can't believe I'm getting paid by somebody who's asking me questions about podcasting, and I'm teaching them how to launch their own podcast. This is incredible. The other thing I used to believe is that people are paying me for my time. And I sometimes would have people who would hire me and say, "Hey, Cliff, can you help me?" I'm like, "Sure." At one point, I finally overcame some limiting beliefs about my price per hour. This was after 2008. I think this happened in 2009 or very early 2010. I had this situation where a guy hired me to help him. I had already made about $1,200 in profit selling him equipment and teaching him how to podcast. By the way, this was at a point where my income was much higher than that first year. But here's the scenario. I just made $1,200 profit. Everything was fine. This was amazing. He's happy. I'm happy. Everything is all on the up and up. Couple months later, he reaches out to me and says, "Hey, Cliff, I'm having a problem with my audio interface. I can't hear the people on the telephone when they call in." And I'm like, "That's interesting." He says, "Yeah, there's static noise on it." I said, "Oh, well, I told you there was going to be static." Because, "No, Cliff, I can't hear them at all." He says, "Can I schedule a time with you?" I said, "Well, I'm a minimum of $300 an hour with a minimum of 1 hour." And he says, "Yeah, sure. Put me on your schedule." I said, "Well, I'm booked for the next 2 weeks. Is that okay?" No worries whatsoever.
Hmm.
So in between our 2 week wait until the scheduled call, I sent him a message that said, "Hey, did you know that JK Audio has an 800 number audio or 800 toll-free support line, and they have great customer service. They'd probably be able to help you troubleshoot this just in case you don't want to wait." He goes, "Hey, Cliff, are you still available next week? If so, I'm more than happy to meet with you then. I'm not in any rush." And I'm like, "Okay, sure." Because I'm sitting here thinking, "Man, I made $1,200 already off this guy, and I don't want him to have to wait to be able to use his equipment." Well, the day comes, and he basically jumps on the call, kind of like we have a Zoom call today. I was using a telephone interface device. I dialed in about 10 minutes early. He dialed in 5 minutes early. So we're 5 minutes before the call starts. I already knew what his issue is that we're going to troubleshoot during this hour that he's going to pay me for. And so I get the phone number, use my cell phone, call it, and he hits the button to pick up, and I hear a noise. By the way, I would not call it static. It was more of a very high-pitched noise, but he called it static. And so I'm like, "Oh." I said, "Do me a favor. Reach behind the device, unplug the power cord." Did the lights go out? Yes. Okay, plug the power cord back in. Did the lights come back on? Yes. All right, great. Hit redial on my cell phone. And he pushes the button. He says, "Hello, hello, can you hear me?" "Yeah." He goes, "That's amazing. Wow, Cliff, thank you so much." And I said, "Oh my gosh, you said that you had heard static. As soon as I heard it, I knew exactly what that is. That's a crossover. More than likely, you had a storm in your area, and when the power went out, when the power came back on, there was a surge, and it just caused that little circuit to have a crossover over." He goes, "Well, I did go out of town, and I had the flashing light, clock on the microwave and the stove. So yeah." I said, "That's exactly what happened." He goes, "Wonderful. Man, this is amazing. Cliff, send me the invoice." And I refused. I said, "I can't send you the invoice. We still have an hour left." He goes, "No, everything's fine." It was like, "Well, hey, let's chat. What else can I help you with? What else can we talk about? I mean, I'm happy to answer anything." He goes, "Cliff, no, I'm all good. That's all I needed. Do me a favor, send me the invoice." And I said to him, "I can't in good conscience send you the invoice. If I were to send you the invoice, I have not earned your money. I should have known that, when you said this I should have thought about that. I knew this kind of thing happens when power goes out. I should have, done this. I made you wait. And, you haven't paid me for this hour. And this is so easy. And I haven't worked hard." And I'm like, "I have not earned your money. And if I charge you $300, I won't be able to sleep tonight because of my beliefs."
Right.
That's what I'm talking about. So the answer to the question is, how do beliefs show up and cause me to have an experience that's undesirable? those are the way.
And you still have never sent him the invoice.
Not that guy, no. But I will tell you, I've since rewired my beliefs. And today, if it were, I would not do it this way, but my belief is this. It's like, hey, I'm booked for the next 2 weeks. Here's what I will tell you. Here's the phone number for JK Audio. It is a toll-free number. They'll be delighted to handle your call. Chances are they'll be able to solve this in no time. And here's what I know. You just purchased this equipment from me a couple of months ago. If they can't solve this over the phone, they're going to pay you to ship it back to them. They'll fix it and send it right back, and they'll express deliver it. However, if you still want to work with me, no worries whatsoever. It's $300, minimum of 1 hour. However, here's the situation. If I solve the problem in less than 3 minutes, it's $450.
Efficiency.
So, and now I don't think and do and things that way, but my belief system today is like, oh my gosh, of course I earned that $300. In fact, what I did was far more valuable than the $300 he agreed to pay, because here's the situation. He had already agreed. He was willing to pay me $300 to solve this issue. He was given an opportunity to get it solved for free. But he said, no, Cliff, I'm willing to pay $300, and I'm willing to pay that $300 for you to help me solve it. And of course, by his own request multiple times, Cliff, send me the invoice. He was willing to pay. And the thing is he was willing to invest an entire hour of his life, up to an hour of his life, to solve that problem working with me. And the fact that I helped him solve it before the hour that was scheduled even started, and that he was off the call by the time he had an extra hour of his day to go do anything else he wanted, that is even more valuable than what he signed up for.
It sounds like there's a little lesson in what he did by not continuing on the hour too, because not knowing the person sounds like he is someone who maybe had less of those money barriers heading into that call, because he was like, no, I got this hour now. That's almost worth $300 to me to have this free hour.
That is exactly right. And today, I see this a lot. I don't do this as much today, but I have a lot of experience working with people who had similar issues about money and what value exchange is and what you're really paying for. And quite frankly, there have been a number of times where somebody hired me and they say, listen, Cliff, I've paid for, an hour of your time. And if you don't mind, I don't want to hear your suggestions about this or this and how you think I can improve this and this. I know you've got all sorts of experience, all sorts of wisdom, all sorts of things you can share with me. But quite frankly, I just need to make sure that I squeeze out every ounce of value out of this 1 hour together. And I've got some questions and I just need to stay on track. And I'm like, it's like, wow. And for me, I would have gladly stayed on the call for an hour and 45 minutes to not only give him what he had paid for, but to also just express some and share some wisdom and some knowledge that could help him get beyond where he's currently thinking he's going.
Well, when it comes to this idea of going through those beliefs, a lot of times I can connect more than other times with guests in terms of that similar hero's journey, but maybe prior to being a hero, where I'm a little closer to the beginning of that. And then the clients that I've worked with, the youth that I've served, they're even, I don't want to use the term behind, but at the beginning, even more so at the beginning of that sort of hero's journey. And I know one of the books that you and I really appreciate in common is The 4 Agreements. When it comes to turning dreams into reality, money blockers is obviously part of it, but there are a lot of things that go into that. And I feel like with my show, it's pretty broad, because someone might want to be a makeup artist. They might want to go into acrylic painting, or they might want to be a musician, own a business, or maybe just climb the ladder in a corporate career. There's a really broad concept of like goal setting amongst our audience. I would love for you to share, aside from just, hey, go buy the book, your take on those agreements and the other things that go into turning a dream into reality?
So the Four Agreements book, there are a couple of main concepts that are a part of the book that I really love and resonate with. The first thing he talks about is what he calls the dream of the planet and the domestication of the human. And I would encourage people to go read this book. It's in any library that you could possibly conceive of. I can't imagine a library today that doesn't have a copy or multiple of the Four Agreements. And anyone could read this book in about 2 to 4 hours max. So it is incredibly powerful. But the idea is that everything that we believe today, every thought, attitude, concept, everything, it was all created. It's all made up. And what has happened is, it's valuable and it has purpose. So many things we wouldn't be able to communicate and exchange unless we had some agreement about the words that I'm speaking, what these symbols are, what they mean. And so there's some agreements that we have that are incredibly powerful to have. However, I already shared with you a couple. It's like the more difficult something is, the more value you give to others by doing it, because that way that difficult task is done. And so that belief, that agreement that I had with that idea, that concept, is not very valuable. In fact, it was hindering me. And so the idea that every single belief, no matter what it is, has all been made up by man. That is an incredibly powerful thing to understand. And a majority of it just isn't accurate, and it isn't always supportive. So I would encourage anybody to read the section that is called The Dream of the Planet and understand what the domestication is the idea is that we've been taught to live in alignment and agreement with everyone, with our family's rules and values and beliefs, and in some instances our religious backgrounds and beliefs, and in our culture, in our town, in our nation. I mean, it's everywhere. So the question is how much of what we believe today are we intentionally, consciously aware of, that's causing us to think and feel the way we do about things when we approach them. So the Dream of the Planet will help you understand the foundation of our belief system, and the fact that you can go digging and you can start questioning everything. Now, he talks about the fact that not all agreements are bad, but when you find some agreements or beliefs that are holding you back, you might want to work on them. Working on them one by one is incredibly powerful. Sometimes you'll find a foundational belief that was supporting about 15 other beliefs on top of it. And if you get one of those, you remove the foundational belief, the ones that were supported by it oftentimes will be dissolved and out of your quote unquote book of law. It will be an incredibly powerful experience. Now, there are 4 agreements he suggests that you adopt. And that's the other thing. It's like you might want to adopt some new beliefs, especially if you're going to go poking around and remove some beliefs. You want to find some empowering alternative beliefs to replace them with. And he shares 4 foundational beliefs or agreements that you can make that will transform your life. And one of them is, there's don't make assumptions, don't take anything personally, always do your best, and be impeccable with your word. So be impeccable with your word was actually the first one. And that just simply means don't sin with the use of the words that you have to speak, whether out loud or in your head. Do not sin or miss the mark of what those words could create. Words are incredibly powerful. And so if you are condemning, judging, and complaining about others and or yourself, you're doing harm. You are causing suffering in the world for others and or yourself. So being impeccable with your word is being, hey, whatever is praiseworthy, whatever is good, whatever is noble, whatever is pure, think and say these things. So be impeccable with your word is the first agreement. The next one is don't take anything personally. And the reality is that nothing anyone ever does is truly personal to us. Everything that anyone does or says as a result of what I am doing or saying is a reflection of what's going on in their life, in their world. It is a reflection of their values, their beliefs, their agreements, and it has nothing to do with me. And this was an incredibly powerful thing for me to learn early on in my marriage. My wife and I will be married 28 years this August. And one of the things that I love is that early on, we attended a marriage conference that helped us understand that my wife can't, number one, make me happy, but my wife also can't make me angry. So there's nothing my wife has ever done to make me angry. Instead, she may have done something which is neither positive or negative, but it's my own thoughts. It's my own beliefs. It's my own meaning that I associate. It's the assumptions that I make. It is all of the stuff, and all of it is within me that causes my anger. So I began to understand, it's like, wow, instead of saying, man, you make me so angry. Every time you do that, it just makes me so angry. And I began to say things like, wow, I just want to let you know that when you do that, I'm aware that feelings of anger pop up within me. And I'm curious what that's all about. And I think it has a lot to do with my expectations of what marriage means and things like that. I always grew up thinking this is what a husband and wife relationship should look like. And wow, now that I say that out loud, it sounds pretty, it sounds pretty lame. And wow, I've got some internal work to do on that. And this has nothing to do with you. My anger issue about this scenario is all on me. It's all in me.
Well, first off, congratulations on 28 years of marriage. That's definitely something to celebrate, especially in today's day and age. I think that's sets a really special example. I'm working towards that. I think we're at, closing in on 10. So
Congratulations.
almost a third of the way there. Appreciate that. I love Kurt Vonnegut has a passage in which he says that if any relationship is troubled, it's because we're asking someone to be too many people. And I think along those lines, for me, I'm not sure where it came from. Maybe more sociological in nature and kind of social, a little bit psychological. I have an academic background in psychology too, but it predated that. But I always appreciated some of these things somewhat naturally. Maybe it came a bit from my parents, although they can certainly hold grudges and get angry with people. I'm not sure where it came from. And it's something that I actually talked in a previous episode with Sister Helen Prejean about. And she giggled. It's one of my favorite clips, and I've never even clipped it, but she said, "Justin, are you the Dalai Lama?" And she was laughing. And I said, "No, certainly not. I'm just sharing openly that no matter what harm people have done, I've never taken things personally." And that, I can remember that back to being like 5 years old. I don't know why or what. But the other overlap for me is, as an athlete, people will always say you're the most annoying person to play against because you piss all of us off. And we've never once seen you pissed off. And again, that's not something that I consciously thought of. I share these examples because I've often struggled to figure out how to teach these things. And this goes back to the first topic we had about goal setting, and as well as this idea of mindset. I used to feel like it was maybe a money blocker for me wanting to create something like a Patreon page or something sort of scalable in terms of business, because I wanted to help people who didn't have a lot of money. Specifically, if we mentioned demographics, I would say like teens who want to accomplish these things. Now, I know someone like Rich Litvin who charges, $50K or $100K for coaching, isn't really able to do that. Some people that I got advice from was, well, you're selling yourself short, because if you create like a membership that's, $20 a month or something like that, then that's probably just money blockers getting in the way. The funny thing is, I've kind of come full circle to be like, no, it's not even money blockers, I don't think. I'm just trying to figure out a friggin' solution for how to teach people who can't afford or who are a lot younger and trying to figure these things out. Um, what do you think when it comes to being able to help youth learn younger, or like how we can change school and the education system? Like, how do we take these topics and best teach them in a way that a lot of youth can learn these things?
Well, one of the things that I'm kind of sticking my mind on is this idea that Rich Litvin can't help those people. So I'm trying to put my mind into how can I find agreement with that statement, because I would encourage anybody who is, let's just say 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, and you want to learn how to become an incredibly profitable coach and educator one day, and all this other stuff. The first thing I would say is probably most of them could find some way to get their hands on the book The Prosperous Coach, although it's probably among one of the more expensive books that you'll find in Kindle format. You typically would pay $9.99 or $14.99 for a Kindle book, where The Prosperous Coach is like $50. But by the way, little hint, it's no longer available in Audible for a single credit, but you can get the Prosperous Coach book for $9.99 in audio format in Apple Books. But even then, here's what I will say. Even if you can't find the book at your local library and you have no money to invest whatsoever with Rich Litvin, here's what I would encourage you to do. Go to youtube.com or your favorite podcast directory of choice, and look for Rich Litvin and or One Insight. It's the name of his podcast. It is in audio format, and it is also in YouTube video format. And there's probably at least, if I had to guess right now, at least 2 or 3 or 400 hours worth of free training material right there. Then I would encourage you to go to richlitvin.com as a teenager and find any email opt-in on Rich's website. I'm a member of his email newsletter. Every single week, I get somewhere between 2 to 4 email newsletters with some of his greatest insights every single week. I can tell you right now, I never have to pay Rich Litvin a single penny. And what I could learn from Rich Litvin about creating a profitable coaching business would far exceed what I could get from most universities.
Completely agree. And just to clarify, I think it sounds like what you're saying is that a book, because it's a perfect example, so a book would be a perfectly reasonable way of teaching some of these concepts to youth.
A book, a podcast, an email newsletter, a YouTube channel, a social media platform of any choice, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, you name it. All of those are incredibly powerful ways to educate youth.
I love it. Not that I'm looking for validation or too much reassurance, but I appreciate being able to tap into someone with as much experience as you on this topic, because I know it's well-meaning advice, but a lot of people will say, for example, that I have the wrong sort of niche, right? Which is maybe a whole other topic that we could talk about, the idea of being multi-passionate. I know someone with 50 plus podcasts, you must, I'm taking a leap here, but I'm assuming you're a multi-passionate person. And the idea of struggling to figure out a niche, or when you're multi-passionate, a lot of people will say that I should coach, executive, like administrative leaders, for example, because I have a master's in educational leadership, and that's something that I could do, right? And that's kind of where I was coming at. That was, it just does not interest me when we talk about our agreements and my values. I want to find ways to help youth, but that's not a good quote unquote kind of target audience, right?
Let me share a story with you. So when my wife and I in 2005 started podcasting about the television show Lost, we were reaching people all around the world. And there was this 15-year-old girl named Anna Sophie. And she had had some pretty significant issues with abuse inside the home. By the way, I'm not telling you anything that she's not said publicly and talked about in multiple different public forums. So just so you know, I just want to get that out here. So she had a lot of abuse and she was suicidal, attempted to take her life several different times. And she was in a situation, in a scenario where she would never leave her house. She was afraid to go outside. She just was shut off from the world. So here she is, 15, 16 years old. And now all of a sudden she's watching this television show, Lost. She's watching Grey's Anatomy. She's watching Desperate Housewives. She's watching all these television shows. And she discovers podcasts. And she discovers that my wife and I are podcasting about this television show. Or all, by the way, all of those different shows we podcasted about back then. And she's like, oh my gosh, I love Cliff and Stephanie. And she started emailing us and asking us questions. She goes, you guys encourage me so much. Here I thought this and I thought that. And her mind was being impacted in an incredibly powerful and profound way. And she, at one point, my wife had shared that she had had a situation with sexual abuse as a child. And then all of a sudden she's like, hey, do you mind if I ask you questions? And just the amount of support and encouragement she got. And then we started hosting meetups in our home for Lost premiere parties and Lost finale parties. And we thought, is anybody going to come and watch this show with us? Well, guess what? Anna Sophie and her sister came from Germany and stayed a week in our home. And it was the most amazing experience. Then all of a sudden she met other people there that became friends, and other people from all over the world, by the way. And she started to go and visit them. So she lived in Germany. She met somebody from Belgium, and she would go to Belgium to go visit her friend who she met through our podcast community. And then she has this friend in London, and she's going to London to go visit there, and she's leaving the house. Right. And all of this because of online forums that we had hosted and all this other stuff. How was I getting paid back then? I was getting paid by sponsors and advertisers for the content that I was created. I had people who were donating. You talk about Patreon. This is way before Patreon existed, but we were making, $28,000-$30,000 a year just from donations from people listening to our show. And so we had all of these things going on. Fast forward, she becomes this world traveler, and she meets somebody that she really loved in New York City, this friend that she met there, and she's going to New York City. And then all of a sudden, she begins to open up. And she goes, hey, guys, she had social media. She had a blog. And she goes, guys, I just want to let you know, this is the first time I'm ever telling anybody this, but I have anorexia. This is how I've been treating my body. I don't know if you've been seeing images of me on social media. You could probably see that I could blow away with the lint. I'm just a few days away from death's door. I'm checking myself in for recovery, and I'm going to blog about it. And so she starts blogging about it. And then she blogs about how she left in the middle of the night and escaped her recovery facility. And then how she went back 3 days later. And she blogged about the whole thing openly, transparently. And then she starts a podcast called Fighting Anorexia. By the way, this is many years later. And she pays me as a podcast coach and consultant to help teach her how to launch her own podcast called Fighting Anorexia. She's reaching thousands and thousands and thousands of people all over the world. By the way, there's a Swedish documentary that's been telling her story. She's in magazines. She's been on all these different news shows telling her story about how she's impacted the lives. We were in New York City for a social media event once, and we were walking down the street. And I'm not kidding. I don't know if you've ever walked down the street in New York City before. There's lots of people, neither of us from New York City. And we're walking down the street, and all of a sudden we hear this screaming girl across the street. And she's like, Anna Suvi. And she says, oh my gosh, I can't believe I get to meet you. I listen to your podcast. I've been reading your blog. I'm your biggest fan and all this other stuff. And fast forward today, Anna Sophie she's in her early 30s now, I believe. She has a child, and she has a very incredibly financially successful career working with an online business influencer in Germany. And she's in my paid mastermind group and has been for the last couple of years. And it never fails. She's like, Cliff, oh my gosh, you and Stephanie, that's my wife, you and Stephanie have known me my entire life.
That's incredible.
So I just want to share with you, don't let anybody else talk down about who you're reaching and who your target audience is, your niche. Now, if you want some advice and some wisdom on how you monetize things, I'm more than happy to help you there. But there's nothing wrong with having a desire to serve young people. And guess what? Those young people won't always be young.
It's really well put, and it's where my heart is. It's where my values are. I won't talk a lot about me because, of course, I do that on other episodes and solos and stuff like that. But in a previous episode, I had Maya Marsha Weeder on the show, and she's been on Oprah's couch twice. And she's someone who doesn't really do much of this stuff anymore because she's essentially retired from this whole thing of being a content creator, of monetizing our hobbies, as you put it earlier. But she just taught dreaming big her entire career. And she said, Justin, do you know how hard that was to quote unquote sell the first few years? But she said that she knew that she had to stick with it because it's where her heart was. She kept coming back to it. And that's what I feel like when it comes to helping youth figure out these sort of paths in life. One of the topics that's come up, I guess, almost every few minutes that we've been talking is podcasting. It's been a huge part of the work that you've done. Even in that beautiful story you just shared, it really started with creating a podcast on Lost. So naturally we'll have to wrap, and maybe, we'll be able to do another episode, but I always try and prioritize a little bit because who knows when that other episode could be. When it comes to the topic of podcasting specifically, I'd like to chat about that a bit. Maybe let's start off with, do you know how many episodes you've created?
Yes, I have 55 podcast shows, and I'm approaching 4,800 podcast episodes.
4,800 episodes. It's amazing. Your ability to create multiple shows, some solo, some interview, as well as go on interview shows, but that's a whole other topic, is really inspiring. As someone who used to have sort of a shiny object syndrome, I think we all do a little bit, but I really would look at like, oh, well, my first million is creating on YouTube. I should be on YouTube as well. And like a lot of times trying to do too much and then pod fading, as we often say in the industry. It's inspiring how much you can create and do it at a really, what I consider, quality level. If somebody was thinking of starting a show, what are some tips that you have or mistakes that you see people make?
The first thing I would say tip is find something that you love to talk about, that you talk about all day long for free, even if you didn't make a single penny, and go out and talk about that. I would encourage you to not look at your download numbers, and don't sit there and think that you're going to get hundreds or thousands of people to listen to you right away, or even in your first 2 or 3 years. I mean, for me, when I had a very unique story, and some magical things happened right out of the gate for my podcast story. But before I published my first episode, I put it out fully anticipating that maybe 3 to 5 people would listen to it, and I would have created the content anyway. Now, my story is that I ended up having over 500 downloads for my very first episode, and I had 27,000 subscribers by the end of the 3rd episode. But that was in 2005. There wasn't a lot of competition in the space, and it was about the television show called Lost. It was pretty amazing. I was terrible, but the content, as far as the topic, was super appealing, and people put up with me in spite of how terrible I was. So now, with that being said, one of my favorite shows that I do today, it's called the Train with Cliff Audio Journal. For the first 4 years that I did it, it was $10 a month. It's $100 a month right now. I don't plan that anybody will ever go and subscribe to this. By the way, you can find it at trainwithcliff.com. If anybody signs up at $100 a month, I will be absolutely shocked. But I started this in November 2017, and let me just click here real quick. I just published my 406th episode. All right. Now, this podcast, as I said, has been $10 a month. On average, it has earned me somewhere around $500 a month, which in my business today is it is actually, if you were to look at it from a financial standpoint, it's a total loss. I could every minute spent on that content creation could be better utilized somewhere else on a financial return on investment. But so that's, I don't know how many people that is that's paying $10 a month, but it's $500 a month is all that has ever been brought in. But here's what I would tell you. I would still publish between 1 to 10 episodes a month every single month of that show, even if there were 3 listeners to it, because it's my audio journal. It's what I love to create. And so my biggest thing, my number one tip, find something that you love to talk about that even if nobody else listens, it was worth creating it.
I also feel like that idea of 1 to 3 to 5 people, the classic advice of if they were in your living room or your kitchen and you were just shooting the shit with them, all of a sudden that seems like a lot of people that you're really helping. And that's something that I've certainly leaned into. One of the big, I guess you could say debates, but topics as far as the podcasting medium goes is this idea of creating video. And I feel like it's holding a lot of people up. The other topic is, well, podcasts are sort of like saturated. Now, I feel like these could be rhetorical questions like, should people create video and is podcasting saturated? But I really appreciate your take on things. So I'd love to hear what you think on those.
Well, podcasting is certainly more saturated today than it was 5 or 10 years ago. But that doesn't mean that there is the one thing that's not saturated is your voice in the world. There is no podcast or YouTube channel in existence that has your perspective on any topic that has ever existed. There is a void and a vacuum of your perception and your perspective on everything. So that's not saturated. Now, is there a plethora of podcasts out there competing for other people's attention? Yeah, that's true. However, the question is what is success for you? I mean, are you willing to put your own kind of weird into the world and attract your own kind of weird community that resonates with who you are? And what do you need as far as numbers to be satisfied with that? And for me, like I said, any given podcast that I desire to produce, if it reaches a handful of people. And by a handful of people, I mean enough people, a small enough crowd that would fit in my home. I'd be delighted as long as what I'm talking about matters to me and it mattered to them. Now, is that going to generate me revenue and income and all this other stuff? Well, it depends. It may be. I can tell you right now, I have one podcast that I produced. There's only 6 episodes of. There will never be a 7th episode. And that podcast has already generated me $90,000.
Wow.
And that's because it promotes my paid mastermind groups, which is $15,000 a year. Had 4 people sign up right out of the gate. And then I had 2 of those people renew for a second year. So that was $90,000 right there. Don't need a lot.
Darn good return on investment in that way. And when it comes to this idea of video, I think there's a large group of people who are kind of audio only purists. There's people who pretty much create only video these days and still call it podcasts. And then those who get a little bit stuck in between. What's your take with so many shows that you have produced? How do you feel about video?
So a majority of my podcast content is audio only. I prefer that because then I don't need to worry about whether or not I just had lunch and do I have cilantro in my teeth. I can't begin to tell you of course, I've got several thousand videos on YouTube as well. And the number of videos where I've got something in my teeth or, it's like, oh my gosh, it's like everything under the sun. thankfully, I've grown some pretty thick skin, and I've, you know, I haven't killed my ego, but I'm not as ego driven as I once was. And I don't take anything personally. And it's not, I'm not trying to impress people anymore. I just want to show up and I just want to be authentic and authentically and transparently me. And quite frankly, I think I can do that more consistently without any concern about how I look or how I appear or the production value in an audio format than I can in video. With that being said, do I have lots of video content? Yes. Do I have some podcast shows that every single show was recorded originally as a live stream and then the audio was taken and put into an audio only feed? Yeah, there's plenty of that going on as well. So I'm not opposed to it. I will say, though, this. I don't believe anyone has a podcast unless it meets the definition of a podcast. And the definition of a podcast is a digital media file that is subscribable and delivered via an RSS feed. And so, as far as I know, Joe Rogan is not the most popular podcaster out there. Because as far as I know, Joe Rogan does not have, in my mind, a pure podcast anymore. You can exclusively subscribe to his podcast on Spotify, which requires a specific app. There is no RSS feed that I'm aware of that I could put in any other RSS reader or any other podcast catching software that you can insert an RSS feed where I can get that delivered. And so therefore, Joe does not have a podcast.
I think that's a great mic drop moment when it comes to podcasting. And as I shared, there's so many things that we could talk about, from networking. I know early on in your career, as well as now, obviously that doesn't really go away, but you're someone who clearly is good at networking and collaborating with others, where you see your own business going and brand, and a little bit of the how-to stuff. Because I know, like I shared earlier, that Maya Marsha, one of the things that she told me to swear by was that I'd continue to pursue this goal, but that I wouldn't stress about how. And I know you've shared similar sentiments before. Those are so many huge topics that we could talk about. I'd love to just get into kind of rapid fire so that we get wrapped in time. But before I do, is there anything on these topics that we'd be leaving out or you'd be thinking about afterwards if we didn't quickly touch on?
Oh, there's an infinite number of things that we've left out. So I'm not going to ruminate on any of it, though.
That in and of itself is a really good piece of wise advice. And with that being said, I'll just get into some of the more rapid fire things. You're a role model to a lot of people. When you were first starting, you probably looked up to others. Who would be a role model for you today?
The role models that I look up to today, my friend Dan Miller, author of the book 48 Days to the Work You Love, he just recently passed away, but he was a personal mentor to me for many years. And even though he may have physically transitioned into his next phase of experience of life, I to this day, he continues to be a role model for me and what he's exemplified. I would say another role model for me would be Michael Hyatt, who has spoke some incredible wisdom into my life. Somebody who I really look up to as well, and it rubs a lot of people. He rubs a lot of people the wrong way, but I still consider him to be an incredible role model in my life. Is Tony Robbins. I really love so many things that I've learned from him. I will tell you, I look up a role model for me would be Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, Jesus, Muji Baba. Just some incredible people in this world that are just absolutely giving love and service to others at all levels.
Well, with respect to the first one that you mentioned, rest in peace, I was spending this morning writing on grief because that's another thing that I do in terms of the work that I like to share with the world. Yesterday would have been my brother's 36th birthday, but he passed 4 years ago. I think it's really neat how I always tell people that you don't really move on. Like, there's a legacy that's always built. And this is just a perfect example. Your first role model was someone who has passed away, and yet that was the first person that came to mind. I think that's pretty special. What is one thing that you yourself are learning right now?
Oh, one thing that I'm learning. That an infinite number of things that I'm learning, but I would tell you what I'm excited about most right now is a deeper dive into cognitive behavioral psychology. I just absolutely love learning why we do the things we do and the motivating forces of pain and pleasure, and just learning how to communicate with myself and others in a way that creates change that lasts forever.
I was working with my therapist recently, who was also my therapist about 30 years ago, and I hadn't seen him in that time gap, which is crazy. Longer story there. When I create the Medium article on what he's taught me this year versus 30 years ago, because he decided to share his framework as opposed to like just therapize me, sort of. He said, let's do it this way. And he was chalk talk whiteboard since January. I'm going to work on sharing that. I'll be sure to share it with you because I think it's really, really interesting stuff. One piece of advice for the next generation, if you could, and there's an infinite number of these too, but what would be one?
My advice is to understand that whatever results that you're getting in life, almost every single one of them are because of the actions that you've taken. And by the way, not taking an action that you know that you need to take or that you want to take, that's also an action. It's actually refusing to take action is an action. So all of the results that you have in life came from the actions that you've taken. And every action that you've taken in life came as a result of how you were thinking and feeling in the moment. And you cannot get different results in life if you don't take different actions. And here's the problem: you cannot take different actions long term unless you change the way that you habitually think and feel. And the only way you can change how you habitually think and feel is if you actually uncover the unconscious beliefs and agreements that you've made about what is true and bring it to the surface and find out what's limiting, because every belief has a consequence.
And I'll keep it very quick, knowing that we're wrapping right now, but I'll answer a longer one later on. But if you were to ask me a question on these topics or otherwise, what would be one question that you would ask me?
If I were going to ask you a question, what is the one thing that you're most hoping to accomplish? Like what would be in your life 5 years from now that's not currently a part of your experience of life?
Being able to create this show to the extent that I would like to, and that would look like many more interviews and many more solo episodes. But when I say to the extent that I would like to, it's because similar to the story you shared earlier about Anna Sophie, looking up to what you created that impacted her and then changed her life doesn't exist for me right now that I know of. And that's one of the biggest goals for me. I think I've done a really good job of the foundational stuff of my own wellness and self-care, relationships with friends, with my wife, and with our kids. Turning my goals to the more business related stuff and accomplishments with this podcast is definitely my biggest dream when it comes to this stuff. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, one of the things real quick that I've done early on and from the very beginning is I always made it a goal, no matter how many subscribers are out there, I want to know as many of them as I possibly can personally. And so I began a spreadsheet where I had several different columns, and the columns were first name, last name, email address, personal detail number 1, personal detail number 2, personal detail number 3. And if you've got a podcast with 500 subscribers, make it a goal to get the first 50 people filled out completely in that spreadsheet.
I think that's massive. That sounds like a great clip there in and of itself. Is there some secret to getting them, or do you just have to ask?
You have to ask. Matter of fact, listen to any of my episodes, and I'm almost always asking people to email me.
Reach out.
Put such and such, put this phrase in the subject line.
That may be a massive domino for me in my entire career, which downstream of that will help a lot of people. So thank you so much. And where and why, when you do so many things and you're putting so much great stuff out into the world, where would you like to point people if they were to go support or follow your work?
The biggest thing that I would encourage people to do is just to get to know me, get on my email newsletter. And I will tell you that if you just go to mindsetanswerman.com/free, my All Beliefs Have Consequences talk is available for free. And if you watch this 1-hour talk, not only will you hear the story about me ripping up $300 and saying I'm not going to send the invoice, I will teach you 4 very valuable lessons. Number 1, how to make the unconscious beliefs conscious so that you know what your limiting beliefs are. That's very important. Number 2, you'll discover the source, and that's important because you want to understand that these are not your beliefs. There's things that you've picked up from somebody else. Number 3, I will teach you how to disassociate or break up with a limiting belief. And I will teach you that not only is it important that you replace it with an empowering alternative, I'll teach you how to condition it. All of that in one talk. It's my All Beliefs Have Consequences keynote, available at mindsetanserman.com/free. And here's another thing that I will do. If you sign up, I do internet marketing sales funnels. Within 24 hours after you watch that, you're going to get an email that says, "Did you get what you were promised?" And it's going to tell you you can buy the whole course for $197. Don't buy it. Email me. My email address is cliff@cliffravenscraft.com. Put free course in the subject line. I will grant you the $197 full course.
That's beautiful. Really appreciate that. Again, I'm sure it will help a ton of people. One of those values that you are quite clearly putting at the front of all the work you do is service and generosity. So, along those lines, thank you so much for taking the hour to do this. I really appreciate it.
Justin, it has been my pleasure. Thank you, my friend. This is a gift. Thank you.
Thanks.